Good morning. Ready for another topic? Yesterday and the day before in the live classes we talked about religion and sexuality. Now, to me that's obvious. Religion, in order to be meaningful, has to deal with the big things in life. So it deals with politics, and it deals with death, and it deals with sexuality. But not everybody sees that. I had a student a couple of years ago that got up in the middle of class, this particular conversation, and just walked right out the door. She walked directly over to the dean, and she lodged a complaint. Sex has no place in a religion class, she said. Well, now the dean was polite to her, wrote down what she said, tucked it away someplace, then called me and said, "Where do they get this stuff?" I don't know. It's people who think that they know what goes on in religion, but they've never bothered to look closely. Have you ever seen this book? This is a Bible. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, sex is everywhere. Not only do you have a whole bunch of commandments to deal with it, thou shalt not gaze upon the nakedness of your daughter, etc., etc. You can't sleep with your wife during her menstrual period or for 7 days after that. If the woman can't prove she's a virgin and she's married with blood on the sheet, she's to be stoned to death. I mean, the laws go on and on and on. But not only do you have that, you have stories, lots of stories. Stories like Lot and his daughters. And their mom has turned into a pillar of salt, and their 2 daughters up there in the hills with their dad are now thinking that they're the only human beings left on the earth once Sodom and Gomorrah had its experience. And so they get dad drunk on 2 successive nights, and one takes advantage of him one night and the other takes advantage of him the next. And you got the story of Judah and Tamar. Judah had sent his daughter-in-law away to wait to marry his youngest son. Never did call her back, but one day when he's walking down the road, he sees her on the side of the road and decides she must be a hooker, so he buys her. Or you get the story of David and Bathsheba, and he's up there on the roof, and he looks over on the roof next door, and there she is taking a bath. And what is he doing in town anyway? He should be off in the battle with the rest of the army, but no, he brings her back, and they have their afternoon fun, and then when the baby sort of appears, he starts to panic, so he calls in her husband from the war, and nothing works out right there, and he has him killed. Or the story of David's son, Amnon, who gets the hots for his sister Tamar and brings her over to his apartment, and in the middle of all of it, she says, no, we got something else to do first. And he says, what? And she says, we have to ask Daddy. Yeah, the Bible's pretty filled with sexuality everywhere you turn. And we even have a really ugly story about one of Noah's sons, Noah and the flood, the 40 days, 40 nights, 2 and 2 and all that kind of stuff. Get off the ark. And one of the sons comes across his father all passed out drunk on the ground, takes advantage of his backside. Yeah, the Bible has plenty of sex. All the religious traditions do. Islam has a lot of things it wants to say about sexuality. Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. And that's where we're at right now. Hinduism has a lot to say about sexuality because they see bliss as one of the 4 paths to God. The Bhagavad Gita, with Lord Krishna in the chariot with Arjuna, Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna, one can pursue the path of bhakti, devotion, celebrating a particular God. So you get the Hare Krishnas. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And they do this over and over and over and over and over again, chanting the name of God, dancing, moving with the music. That's one way. A second way would be the royal yoga. Yoga, where you're doing all the exercises, but it's more than the exercises. It's focusing on the way the energy of the cosmos moves through your body. And through this, you can come to oneness with the One. But then one of the paths, Krishna says, is the path of bliss. Bliss, where in that pure moment of indescribable elation, the barrier between one and the One falls away. For just a short moment, you can't say I, because I don't exist. It's just a single reality that's being experienced. There's no way to describe it, but once you've been down that road, you know it. And there are a lot of people been down that road. Some of you maybe. It's not necessarily about sexuality. You can experience bliss in a lot of funny little moments. Moments like when you see that sunrise. It's so freaking incredible. Or a moment like you're in a concert, especially something like a Mozart piece or Beethoven's Ninth, huh? And all the world melds into one reality in that moment for you. And then you go, I'm feeling, and it's over. Because as soon as there's an I, it's gone. But Vatsyayana, about 1800 years ago, realized that the easiest path to bliss is through the most intense pleasure we have, sexuality. So Vatsyayana, who was a Brahmin priest, did you catch this? This is important. A Brahmin priest, probably quite advanced in age, according to the things he says about himself in the book he wrote, collected all of the teachings about how to have bliss together in a book that is now known as the Kamasutra. Kama is pleasure, Sutra is teaching. Remember, pleasure comes in a variety of forms. A really good slice of New York pizza. That first bite, that's intense pleasure for me. Or lying in the grass on a spring afternoon and watching the clouds float overhead, that's pleasure. Sitting in a baseball stadium in spring training with a bag of peanuts and a glass of something, that's pleasure. But the most intense pleasure is sexuality. So although the Kama Sutra talks about pleasure in general, it also spends a lot of time talking about sexuality, but it isn't what people think it is. You might want to give one of these to people for their wedding night, right? Help them out. There's a manual that tells you what to do, right? No, it doesn't. It's not a how-to book. It's a book that deals with the principles that underlie what's going on. It does have some how-to, some advice on things like how to have an argument, because you want to have an argument that's not going to end with her walking out the door, but instead has at least the possibility of it ending up in that other kind of make-up moment. So people go to the bookstore and they look at this and they flip through and they look at all these pictures and they think, wow, the Kama Sutra is great. Except the pictures have very little to do with the Kama Sutra. Vatsyayana wrote the book about 1800 years ago. The pictures are drawn about 700 or 800 years ago. In other words, for 1,000 years, Vatsyayana's book existed without the pictures. Indeed, I'm not going to show it to you, but there's one picture in here that you can look through this text for as often and as deeply as you want to, and you will not find any reference to that particular picture, because I think it's meant to be a comic. In a live class, they get to see me draw it on the board. If you want to get a hold of the Kama Sutra and you want to feel it for something like what Vatsyayana had, this is probably a better edition. A translation by Wendy Doniger. And there are no pictures, just the text. We should read it. Because in reading it, we discover an incredible statement. Vatsyayana's argument is that two people cannot experience bliss if they don't know what they're doing. It's fairly easy to eat a piece of New York-style pizza without training, although a lot of people don't get that you're supposed to fold it in half when you eat it. But it's fairly simple. You can enjoy the bliss of that. You just lie on your back in the grass and you explore the bliss of that afternoon. But when you use the one that's got the best chance for reaching that moment of bliss, most people aren't born knowing what to do. You stick two virgins together on their wedding night, and they go into the room, and you think it's going to be a good experience. Some of you can remember back on that particular thing. I'm just going to assume most of you are probably virgins. That's just because it's my naivete. It's easier for me to talk to you. But for some of you who are married now, or whatever, you're recollecting that first experience, and you remember somebody stuck an elbow someplace where it wasn't supposed to go, or somebody tried to turn somebody's leg in a direction it wasn't meant to turn. Somebody bit something that wasn't supposed to be bitten. Sex isn't something that comes naturally, the simple animalistic act, but that kind of sexuality that can lead to bliss. That's not a natural thing. We need an education, he says. And that's what this book is. what's incredible about this book is that this book assumes something about women that throughout human history men have not assumed. That they're full, three-dimensional human beings. And the argument made in this particular book is that a man cannot attain to bliss with a woman who herself is not fully realized. The first chapter argues, he lays out his whole path of gathering all the materials together, and then he says there are different kinds of people. Now, I'll give you this one. Some men are bulls, and some are stallions, and some are rabbits. He's not talking about speed or strength. He's talking about size. Think it through. Then he says, but some women, well, I forget the animals. I could look it up. I like to use this one instead. Some women are like really tight little alleyway, and some women are like the street you live on, and some women are like a highway to Montana. And he says, none of this is a problem. We are what we are. It's when you start matching up that it makes a difference. And the wrong kind of matching up with the man and the woman can lead to some frustration, just some disappointment. Just imagine, take the little rabbit and put him on a highway to Montana, and it ain't going to turn out well. So he says, the goal is to find compatibility. It always strikes me funny because I'm not sure how you do that in a conservative society. Marriages are arranged, and what are you supposed to do? Walk up to her father and say, hey, I like your daughter. Is she more like an alleyway or a highway? I don't think he's going to know the answer, do you? But there's another thing. Some men are like, have an appetite that's 24/7. And some men are just like, 3-4 times a week. And some men are like, has it been 6 months already? And some women are 24/7. And some women are 3 or 4 times a week. And some women are every 6 months too. And he says, you put the wrong combination together, you have two very unhappy people. So he says, that's something that needs to be matched up. Now, all of this is a way of saying, did you notice that he was paying attention to females? A man knows about men. But for him to be able to begin to explore females fascinates me. It's like he's getting into the mind of women. But, okay, I'll give you the best one. His second chapter is on the arts and the sciences. He says for a man to attain to bliss, he has to be with a woman who's fully trained in the 64 arts and sciences. I'm going to read it from this because I like the translation that Indra Sen puts in here. And he says, every woman should be trained in singing, performing on musical instruments, dancing, painting on walls, painting on palm leaves and smooth stones, cutting letters with leaves. All of that sounds like women's stuff. I mean, just the kind of cute thing you do in the parlor, right? Maybe it isn't true. Creating mandalas and flowers and rice. Wait a minute. A mandala is a meditation device. It's a painting that's drawn temporarily for the sake of meditation, and it's done by men. And here he's got that women should be trained in this. Then he goes back. Decorating walls and floors with flowers, coloring the body, hair, nails, teeth, and clothes, making mosaics, arranging couches, playing tunes on glass bowls filled with water, swimming in water games. All sounds like, cute women stuff, right? Meditation using mantra and yantra yogas. Again, that's supposed to be man's territory. Vatsyayana is saying a woman needs to be trained in everything a man can be trained in. Dressing and wearing jewels with style, making conch and ivory bangles and earrings, blending perfumes, inlaying with precious stones, magic tricks and illusions. There you go. Preparing aphrodisiacs and herbal charms, sleight of hand, cooking, mixing sherbets, sewing, embroidery, weaving birds, chanting from sacred texts. In ancient India, that was unheard of, for a woman to be able to touch the sacred texts. Vatsyayana seems to be a screaming feminist. His argument that a woman fully realized is the only way a man can be fully realized. I see that I'm running up to about 15 minutes. So I'll pick this whole conversation about sexuality and religion back up again when we get to Hinduism.